Hello, everybody. This is Dr. Dan Cartalicchio. I want to welcome you to another segment of Destination Health Podcast, Finding Function in a Dysfunctional World. I'm looking forward to our conversation today. We're going to have a great time. We always like to motivate, educate, and inspire. We have a very special guest today, Dr. Keshav Grover. Doc, how are you doing today? Where are you in the world right now?
I'm doing great. It's a sunny day here in Detroit, Michigan, so can't complain.
All right. So, you said beforehand it's getting a little warm there. So you're, it's okay because you get a lot more snow and cold weather than we do here in New Jersey. And my listeners know, and I said that my son plays hockey. So we're looking to get him into diving. Like I said, Miami Beach, South Miami, Speedo, it's cheaper than hockey skates, I think. At least I think, in my mind, at least I think. But Dr. Grover is a fully licensed physician in Southeast Michigan, extensive medical background, highly sought after practitioner in functional and integrative medicine. My first question is going to go there. Dr. Grover completed his undergraduate studies, prestigious Lyman Briggs School of Science at Michigan State University. I'm a Rutgers graduate. We weren't in the Big Ten back then, but we are now. His time at ASU confirmed his passion to pursue a career in medicine, decided to increase his background, got a master's degree. I got a master's degree too. Too much education at Wayne State University School of Medicine. From there, he was accepted to MSU College of Osteopathic Medicine, trained in general medicine, facial plastic surgery, otolaryngology. That's a big word. That's a big word, You study neurosurgery, craniofacial surgery, plastic surgery. So welcome to the program, Dr. Grover. Traditionally trained physician, you are. Traditionally trained. What was that moment in time that you decided to go functional and integrative? Anything personal, family, friends? What was that moment?
So, growing up in a physician's household, I was always exposed to traditional medicine, but also growing up in an Indian household, I was always exposed to the quote unquote home remedy way of doing things. And in India, a lot of home remedies stem from the Ayurvedic tradition. And just to give you a simple example, what we know now as golden milk or a turmeric latte, that has become kind of sensational or even, quote unquote gram worthy in terms of the photos that people or videos people take of it, really just stems from the fact that, when people had an injury or people were sick or they had some kind of viral or bacterial illness, they would use turmeric mixed with milk, ginger, honey, cinnamon, or some kind of, or whatever ingredients they could get their hands on, and some black pepper to make this drink to basically create an anti-inflammatory situation and to reduce pain, and as in some ways also as an antiseptic. And so I kind of grew up with both of those thought processes in the household where, my father being a doctor and my mom also being a very kind of interested home remedy healer, if I will. And, a lot of people will even call her to ask her about things because she's just interested in that. And also her brother, my uncle, he was huge into yoga and meditation and using food as medicine and getting the right supplements. And I even remember him trying to have our family start using greens powders before they were even trendy. So, just to so the concept of functional and integrative medicine has actually been part of my life for longer than it has been on my resume per se. But, getting back to your question, a few years ago, I decided to, transition from my traditional ear, nose, and throat path into functional and integrative medicine. And I really felt that I had an opportunity to help people get to the root cause of problems, whether it was allergies, whether it was weight issues, whether it was reflux, whether it was other things going on. And I really like the fact with functional and integrative medicine, we're going and first of all, figuring out, well, why is this person having these issues? Or if they're not having issues even, and if they want to optimize their life or to fine tune their life, how do we do that? And then the second component of it is the integrative component, where a lot of times people will feel like integrative medicine just means that you're using herbs or you are disregarding the traditional medical modalities that we have to help people out. But really, part of being integrative is using those modern day medicine and traditional modalities alongside with other healing modalities and figuring out what is the right combination for the person to use, because there is good on all ends. I mean, in an acute situation, I think traditional medicine has thrived in terms of if you're having a heart attack, you have a car accident or something, and you need to go to the hospital. There's, unfortunately, turmeric in that situation is not going to help you immediately. So I think, we have to look at and say, okay, where does traditional medicine fit into the model? Where does functional and integrated medicine fit into the model? And how do we kind of have that nice Venn diagram of both of them together? So that's my practice philosophy. I like to include as many healers or providers in terms of having a community approach to helping people out. And especially, now with telemedicine, we're getting some requests from people that are 3, 4, 5 hours away and may not be able to make it into our office. So I'm also trying to see, okay, who else can we tap in their area or that could help them out? And, whether that's in state or out of state. And so I think it's really important for us to take a team approach. Just like in hockey, you can't get the puck in the net without a team approach.
There are some kids on the team that don't pass, and we lose those games. So
I can imagine.
Yeah,
I can imagine. But it takes a team to approach, in my opinion.
Right. Well, I'm on the same page with you, because there is a place for Western medicine. There's a place for Eastern medicine. And I think that, my listeners know, and I think I communicated to you that I had a heart attack. I'm not looking to take different supplements.
I didn't know that, but
yeah, my triglycerides were 1227. My cholesterol was 800. I was stressed out, and I had 3 offices in 3 different states, Dr. Grover. And to me, I explain it as a marble going in my blood vessel. It was like a marble rolling down, and I had passed out. My blood pressure during that time was 220 over 140.
Wow.
I went to a cardiologist friend.
I'm glad that you're here with us. I mean,
yeah, sure. So that's what brought me into the functional medicine world. I mean, I was an athlete growing up. I played in college and so forth. And that was a life altering experience. It's one of those experiences that you have in life where you just change your existence. And that's how I got into the functional medicine, went for the masters and all of that. But I think it's important for our listeners to understand that there is good in that there's good in each form of medicine, because, right after I had my cardiac event, if you will, of course I was taking different types, they were trying different combinations of, statins and Tricor, which I believed I needed to take. But what I find interesting is that individuals that come into the office, they don't know the functional approach. They may take a medical approach, and I always say this to students: you can't out supplement a bad diet, and you can't out medicate a bad diet, right? Because food is medicine. Yeah. What are your thoughts on that? Do you find in your office that people change to that functional model, a patient, after one of these adverse events?
So, yeah, I definitely think that, like yourself, many individuals have this kind of light bulb moment when things hit the fan, quote unquote. I won't use the exact word here, but
You can. Let me tell you something. It's been used on this podcast before.
All right. So what the heck? When shit hits the fan, we then have this kind of a wake up moment where we're like, you know what, we've got to do something to change the way we're living our day to day lives. And you were mentioning having 3 offices, running around and whatnot. And one of my mentors, who is a surgeon, he actually, I would say more than one of my mentors who were very busy surgeons. One unfortunately passed away in his very early 60s from appendiceal cancer, and it wasn't even something that anybody expected. And he worked a lot. He was probably working 70, 80 plus hours consistently every week. Right. His operating room was busy. I mean, his clinics were very busy because he was good, and he loved what he did. And right. but I think
you were in service of humankind at that point in time. So if you're busy, you're doing it. You have to have a passion for it. You're providing a service. You're saving lives, right? I mean, that's what we do.
Correct. And another one of my colleagues one of my mentors, I should say, he is a surgeon as well, and he has a history of cardiac disease. And recently, in the past, I think 2-3 years, he had a open heart bypass, and he made the decision recently to retire from operating this year and kind of really take, I think, a stronger look at his health. And he said, you know what, I worked hard enough. I don't need more money. He lived, pretty moderately, or modestly, I should say. And so he made a bold move and I think he's, maybe late 50s, early 60s at the most. So many people could even say, well, you've still got time, how come you're doing this, et cetera. But I think a lot of times we get so caught up in this rat race of trying to grow, whether that's economic reasons, whether that's, other kind of workaholic tendencies, or that's all we know what to do is to work. And so that's, and we don't take the pause out and say, well, wait a second, what about this one? What about how can I treat others well if I'm not experiencing wellness myself? And so it's almost like you're trying to be this amazing chef, but you've never tasted the food you're cooking. And, so to me, it's almost imperative across the board, whether you're a doctor, you're a nurse, you're a mid-level, you're an MA, whatever form of provider you are, chiropractic, nutritionist, the list goes on in terms of how many different kinds of healthcare providers there are. There should be time in everyone's lives on a consistent basis to check in with themselves and say, hey, wait a second, am I taking care of myself in terms of reducing stress, or I should say trying to eliminate stress? Because the problem is, it's like, I look at stress as like trash. Nobody wants to manage trash. You just want to take it out of your house, right? I mean, and so that's the way that I try to think about stress, is that we just have to put it into the garbage bag and get it out. And then, because if you're managing it, you're still it's still within you. So we have to figure out that part, because, I won't go into the nitty gritty of the details, but we all know now that our bodies experience the fight or flight response more times in a day, especially with things like, phone notifications and, social and emails, and just the way how life is so busy. Then, I think that our prehistoric ancestors did when they were truly in the jungle, having to run from lions and tigers, or figuring out where their next meal was coming from, in terms of that stress response. And so we are doing a lot of damage to ourselves with stress. We aren't eliminating it or finding avenues to help ourselves out with that. And I think a lot of that is, once you start doing one or two of these lifestyle routines in terms of whether that's using food as medicine in your day-to-day intake, whether that's doing mind-body work, whether that's uh, whether that's even getting something like a massage or getting an acupuncture session, which some people might think is a luxury, or and in some cases I can understand that from an economic purpose, but these are all healing modalities. And so I think that, getting back to your point is that in terms of patients coming into my office, it's absolutely clear that they are realizing within themselves, hey, wait a second, something has to change here. Something I'm doing is not right. And so I think that's the first step, is admitting that whatever it is that you're doing on a daily basis is not working. And if you're trying to make a change, then you have to change what you're doing on a daily basis, because that, heart attacks don't happen overnight, especially from like thromboembolic events. Even these acute coronary vasospasms, I mean, that generally is because there's some underlying stress that's going on and a predisposition to that event. Obviously, there are probably isolated events where that can happen on its own, but and I don't want to speak for my cardiology colleagues, but I think that it's becoming very clear to me that, and most of the community, that we need to do a better job as practitioners to understand what it takes to live a lifestyle-based life that incorporates all of these tenets. So then it's not necessarily where you're thinking, did I do this? Did I do that? Did I do this to keep myself healthy? It's just part of your life.
It becomes who you are. It's what you do on a daily basis, right?
Exactly. 100%.
Because as you're talking, I'm formulating all of these questions, and let's stay with stress a little bit. There's good stress, there's bad stress. Bad stress, I mean, when you're stressed, you eat poorly. I'm busy. I was growing from a business standpoint, but it all kind of came crashing down on me. I had to look at stress a different way. I had to look at success a different way after this event that I had. And, you have to go through this transformation. And, coming from an immigrant family, coming from where they came from in Italy and Sicily and so forth, becoming a doctor or having businesses was something that they wanted for their children. And, that was something that was very important in our household. And I'm sure it was in your household too, right? So, but it's different today, right? Where you have to live the lifestyle. If you're going to be a physician, and for all of our listeners, you're going to somebody that's telling you to lose weight, and maybe they tell you you have metabolic syndrome. You got a little bit of belly stuff going on. You have, a little bit of blood pressure. Your sugar is high. We say plasma glucose or HbA1c. Most people know those terms today. I live the lifestyle. You're living the lifestyle, and I think that's important to do when you're seeking out somebody in the functional or integrative. The old moniker is that the physician back in the 60s and 70s, Dr. Grover, told you to stop smoking, and he was puffing on his cigarette. And he had an ashtray in the front. So, and we're finding out what's not working. And I think that's important. Let's talk about that, because I find that my patients, sometimes it's very difficult for them to change. Taking away something means pain, right? And especially if you're in the functional integrative world, it's a different lifestyle. Do you have issues where, do you have a little bit of difficulty getting people to see the light, if you will?
I think that that part of and this is where I think health coaching is pretty important in this aspect. And that's something that I'm working on in our practice, to get I wish I could be, I wish I could be more involved in all of my patients' day-to-day lives, but unfortunately, there's only so many hours in the day,
Right.
and I think there's a few tenets that make this process successful. One is having a motivated patient, that they are ready to go. You say jump 10 feet, they're jumping 10 plus feet. So I think that, the level of motivation that the patient themselves brings to the table is important. And I think we as practitioners need to figure out and get a sense of how motivated they are. Because if they're not motivated and if they're not prepared, we can come up with the most robust plan for them and want to run all these labs and whatnot that sometimes we do. And nothing happens because they're either A, not motivated, B, they're overwhelmed, C, there may be some economic factors that play a role. But oftentimes, I think that there's a lot of practical ways we can apply functional and integrative techniques into our day-to-day basis without necessarily making it very expensive.
Right. Sure.
For example, walking doesn't cost anything.
No.
Dancing doesn't cost anything.
Right.
Going up and down the stairs in your home doesn't cost anything. If you live in a warm climate, going outside doesn't cost anything.
Getting a little sunshine doesn't cost
a little
anything.
vitamin D. And so making sure that we're, hydrating adequately, making sure that we are, I remember even Dr. Mark Hyman talking about this, where when he was traveling, I think in the middle of the country on one of his tours, he ended up eating in like a Chinese restaurant and for dinner. And he was mentioning that, I was lost because everything was either very, a lot of refined carbohydrates and processed foods. But he said, hey, wait a second, and I may not be telling the story 100% accurately, so forgive if there's any, lapses. But the gist of it is that basically he just ordered a lot of vegetables. He said that, and I think he may have had some protein with it. Right. And so the point being is that, sometimes we get bogged down. Is it organic? Is it GMO? Is it this? Is it that? But whatever it is that you have the access to that can satisfy things like, getting in, like even Dr. Terry Walls, who's created the Walls Protocol for great work with
Terry very well, yeah.
And other neurodegenerative diseases. She talks about 9+ cups of vegetables every day.
Right.
And so, just doing something like that can increase the, like, for example, for women that have hormonal issues that have extra estrogens, by increasing cruciferous vegetables like our broccoli and kale and things like that, that's going to help clear out those estrogens and take it out. So that doesn't cost.
It gets rid of that.
Right.
And you don't have to buy the products if you don't want to, because diet is always number one. Like I said before, you can't out supplement, out medicate bad diets when it comes to that. Yeah. And I find it interesting because you have to get those patients motivated to be consistent with their program. I have in my office, when somebody's on a program, it's an average of 4 to 6 times they fail. They're in high risk situations. I don't get so mad at them, but I use them as learning experiences. And to go back to what you were saying is that you don't have to, because they say it's functional medicine, integrative medicine for the rich and famous. Listen, I mean, I have a cardiologist that refers to me, and I support and I reiterate, half an hour a day of walking. Get your dog. Dr. Grover, get your dog, right? It's getting warm, right? And just go out and walk a little cardiovascular. You don't have to do a marathon today. We'll discuss that in years down the road if that's a goal that if you want to do that, but it's not a situation that you have to spend a lot of money. Walking a half an hour a day, 15 minutes out, 15 minutes back, curtailing your alcohol intake, right? I really don't drink alcohol anymore. I find that I get brain foggy. and so forth. It's just not for me.
Mm-hmm.
And those processed foods, let's talk about these processed foods, because there seems to be some type of link with, we got to watch how we say these things these days. There's a link between being in ill health or having a chronic lifestyle disease and going through kind of what we've been going through in the world, where you get very poor outcomes and you're susceptible to more stuff. You don't have to be a physician to understand that. Mm-hmm. However, you need to make proper food choices, correct?
100%. I mean, I always give the example that, if you bought a expensive exotic vehicle or whatever vehicle you have, let's say you have a gas car, you're not putting diesel fuel in that. Or if you have diesel fuel car, you're not putting gas in that, and I look at us as human beings, we are the most successful species on this planet in terms of what we have achieved as a species, right? Mm-hmm. We've sent people to the moon. We have, created technologies for us to have this conversation over Zoom. No other species has been able to do that. And to me, I look at us as kind of the elite kind of Formula One vehicles out there. And if you're trying to win a Formula One race, or if you have a high-end vehicle, you want the best fuel in there, right? I mean, people will spend more on the fuel they put in their vehicles,
right, than they do for the fuel for their body, right?
Exactly. But then they eat, excuse my language again, but they eat shit food.
Yeah.
And sometimes I understand that, because if you're in a lower socioeconomic neighborhood and the only option you have is the corner store or a gas station or a 7-Eleven to do your groceries, and a lot of it tends to be those packaged foods like chips and cereals and other things like that, and like, ho-hos and whatnot, then all that stuff is basically refined carbohydrates with a large amount of salt and, dyes and preservatives and other things, rather than being able to pick up, a avocado and have that and get some great fats in your body, as an example. Or like, like your ancestors from Italy. I mean, and that's the other thing that I try to even emphasize, being here in Detroit, we have a large African-American community, and I've been approached by some individuals to help out with some, and I'm trying to work on a few things for the inner city in Detroit right now. And the one thing that I think about often is, how did in general, as human beings, grandparents and their grandparents eat? And even if you look at it in the African-American community, the foods that were made more in, like, let's say, the rural communities where, they were eating their collard greens, they were eating sweet potatoes, they were eating a lot of these foods, wild rice, different corn that had different phytonutrients in it. Right. Their consumption of food was way more of that rainbow effect that people like Dr. Deanna Minnick and even Dr. Elizabeth Boham talk about. And
Dr. Elizabeth's been on the podcast too. So yeah.
Great individual. And so
love Dr. Elizabeth. Yep.
But point being is, like, I try to connect with my patients' own history. When I say history, I mean their ancestral history. Right. In Italy, if you're having olive oil, extra virgin, you're getting the phytonutrients from there. You're getting all of the great plant sources. I mean, Italy has some of the most fertile soil in the world. And I've had the privilege of traveling there with my wife, and we experienced some of the best meals there. The quality of the produce is just fantastic, because you can taste the minerals that are in the soil coming through that produce. Right. And unfortunately, our soil, this is a totally different topic, but our soil also is somewhat depleted of nutrients that we need. And that's where the supplementation comes into play.
Right. That's where supplements to come in.
Exactly.
So I find this fascinating. The two things that I thought of, and when I look down, I'm always writing. Um, where did this all change? And in my estimation, I'm 60 years old, so I'm a little old. And where I think this all changed was sometime in the 70s. I remember going from homemade foods, macaroni, right? Homemade meats, going to a deli that had this stuff. It was imported daily from Italy and Sicily, going from fresh produce because, I remember my father and my grandfather, it wasn't that they went once a week like a lot of people do when they buy foods and they buy canned foods because it's got to last and all of that. They went every other day or daily to get fresh fruits and vegetables. As a matter of fact, a lot of times you didn't even have to go because there was the peddler in the street that would come by, Dr. Grover, and they would have the fresh meats and they would have the fresh fruits and vegetables, just like in the old country, I guess.
Yeah.
But sometime
and that's how it is in India too. I mean,
right?
in India, when we go back, I mean that the peddlers, they come to the house and they're in our native language, they'll be, yelling out what they're selling and what they have on their cart. And if you want it, you come out. And they start pretty early because I remember, we go back to New Delhi when we go back to India, and it's a busy city. And so in the morning, right around, I think like 6:30 a.m., they're out there, and you get naturally woken up by that. And so
it's a small world after all, because you can be Indian or you can be Italian.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing. They just did the same thing. And it's just interesting.
I think at some point, Doc, what happened is that, just like how everything with technology, where we have these artificial intelligence bots that you can say, hey, blank, whether it's, Alexa or Siri or whatever. Right. I think mine just went off when I said it in the room, but point being is we have a lot of these things that we're doing. I mean, if you think about it, no other generation, even the royalty 100 years ago, did not live as convenient of a lifestyle as we do now. We want something, you go on Amazon, it's primed to you either that day or the next day. I mean, and I even remember growing up, the concept of a package coming to the house, that was like a big deal. If somebody sent you a package or you got a box, now it's like there's a box outside every other day for people.
With my wife, it's every day, but we won't say anything.
Same here. But point being is that we as human beings have tried to make the world such a convenient place. Right. If you really think about it, the amount of effort that you would have to do, and this even comes down to our food consumption, and why a lot of people will say, well, why do we have fat? I mean, think about it. In the pre-agricultural days, if you had to go hunt for your protein, you had to go forage a forest for berries and leaves and roots and whatnot. That took a lot of effort. So you're burning calories doing it. And then B, you're probably not eating 3, 4, 5 times a day. I mean, in those situations, you may have been eating once a day. You may have been eating twice a day maximum. I mean, it wasn't like we had this constant, people were dying of other things then, right? Whether it was trauma, whether it was
they were attacked by a saber-toothed tiger or something like that, right? Or, you go back that. I mean, that's really where that.
Or infections, or like they have an open wound, it gets infected, now they have sepsis and they die, things like that. So, or even the fact that nowadays we have things like glasses so that we live longer, because if you couldn't see, then that also puts a risk to your health. So, I digress. But point being is that we've made life so convenient,
so easy,
and that we are not helping ourselves because the convenience factors of how things are is is pretty ridiculous if you think about it.
Right.
And it's only leading us to more disease.
Right.
It's not really helping us in the long run. Yes, some things are amazing, like this, being able to talk to you over Zoom, or
right, because we can motivate, educate, we can inspire. Yeah. That's incredible. That's the good aspect.
I'm not poo-pooing all technology and all convenience.
Oh, I understand what you're saying.
But
sure.
I think a lot of it is, you know, it's we have to go back to the basics, because I think when we go back to the basics, we're able to.
I think that's important, right?
And whether that's remembering what we ate in our grandparents' homes or in your home growing up, in terms of the concept of maybe not exactly what you were eating, but how it was prepared, being that it was
right.
Being that it was home cooked, there weren't that many ingredients. You knew what you were eating because you made it or your family made it. And even like this concept of how things are organic or non-organic.
Right.
I mean, I had this discussion with a relative of mine who lives in Switzerland, and he said to me, he said that if anything is classified as organic, it's extremely expensive in Switzerland, because the concept of organic there is this kind of super elite organic, where, because naturally in Europe, they have such stringent policies on what can be used in their food or what can be used to grow the food, that if you look at the standards of what is considered organic in the US,
different.
That is almost what the conventional standard is in Europe, or at least in Switzerland, where he's from. Right. And so, like he was saying to me, that he said, like, yeah, pesticides and all these things are not really allowed to be used that are used in the US for conventional agriculture. And so I think we just need to think in our heads, okay, like how did we eat as a species, and how did we live as a species 100+ years ago, and adopt some of those principles back into our life.
Bring those back into our life. I agree with you, because I remember at some point in the 70s, life got a little bit more complicated. We went to high school. We were playing sports, your studies, and so forth and so on. You know, mom went back to work at some point in time. I was that latchkey kid where you came home and there was nobody there. So they purchased, TV dinners, they were called, right? And you throw them in, to a microwave, and you had something to eat before you went to practice, and they weren't so healthy for us, and they were made poorly. And I remember specifically eating some of this stuff and feeling brain foggy even back then, not feeling right, because it just wasn't good for you. It wasn't healthy for you. And at some point in time, that's when they had these foods that you can throw into a microwave. You can have a meal within 2 minutes, 3 minutes, throwing it into a microwave, and there's preservatives in there. Yeah. It's not made with the finest oils. Maybe it's vegetable oil. So you're getting a lot of omega-6 fatty acids, which we all know is pro-inflammatory. You get that arachidonic cascade going, and you're not living the life at that point. And I remember reading an article. This reminds me of an article in the Mayo Clinic proceedings. I'm going to say 3 or so years ago. They were looking at teenagers in Europe, specifically Spain, where their waist to hip ratio was increasing, where their metabolic, there was a metabolic dysregulation because they were eating processed foods. Processed foods were beginning to permeate society. And, I don't remember any of the p-values, the confidence intervals, or anything like that. But what I do remember with the article is that these processed foods are readily available, they're highly palatable, and they're very affordable. And, to me, they're just very addictive, because to have that, we were mentioning ho-hos and ring dings and Twinkies and Funny Bones. I salivate. It's like a Pavlovian reaction, because we used to eat them in the 70s all the time, by the way.
Yeah. And, I ate some of that in the 90s growing up. I mean, it was kind of similar. I mean, and, that Pavlovian effect that you're talking about, think about this. I mean, I have a 2-year-old daughter, and now she already associates, like, goldfish crackers, for example, with this kind of happy expression. You can see it on her face that as soon as she sees that package, her face kind of lights up because,
Sure.
she's been exposed to it. And, like these companies, and in some ways, from a business perspective, you have to applaud their efforts because they've done well for themselves from a business perspective.
Sure.
But from a what they've done to humanity, what they've done to the medical world. I mean, that's a whole nother topic in terms of the big corporations and food science in terms of what flavor profiles are more addicting than others, or using things like MSG, which is monosodium glutamate, as a flavor enhancer, and other things that we know now that are leading to more inflammatory conditions, leading to more leaky gut, and other things that have created these chronic diseases that we know now, that are a lot of them being the metabolic diseases.
Right.
But to me, I just think that, when you go to the grocery store, try to stay in the periphery. Don't go to the aisles as much, because in the aisles, you're going to find things that are packaged, processed, refined, and that are made by the big corps.
Right.
But if you are in the periphery, you're now looking at more of the perishable items, right? That are more like organic, from the sense that they are from the earth, not necessarily classified or certified organic, but because I know some communities don't have that access, or some grocery stores don't have that. But I do encourage listeners to look at things like the Dirty Dozen, the Clean 15 from 100%. The Environmental Working Group, just to get an idea of, okay, what can I eat that's safe, that's maybe not organic, and what should I avoid, or what should I try to get that's organic? And, I encourage people that if you live in communities with farmers markets, with, those kinds of setups, to use that, because when we go and buy things from them, we support our local and organic farmers. And then that also then helps to increase healing naturally by providing more of that food as medicine per se.
I mean, I think every community, not every community, but a lot of communities, they'll have a farmer's type of a market. I had an office in a town called Perth Amboy. And to this day, if I'm driving by, and, a lot of Latin Americans in that area, they have the best farmer's market right there. You can go get your fruits and veggies. It's reasonable and they're delicious. I stop by whenever I'm driving by in that area. Boom, I go right there. It was right around the corner from my office. So it was easy back when I had my office there.
Yeah.
In Newark, there's these farmers markets. In towns, there's farmers markets. The fresh fruits and vegetables. I have a farm about a half a block north of me, and we go there. Now it's going to start, because they're going to start tilling the land and so forth. But that's more, that's better for you, instead of going for the fast foods and so forth, because life can become difficult and life can become stressful and life can become busy, but you need to take time for yourself and take care of yourself, because if you don't, eventually life is going to come crumbling down upon you. I think that's a main theme that we're talking about.
Yeah. And I think it's just one of those things where, it's much easier to fix a leak when it's a drip rather than now when it's, a gush. And so I think that it's important to check in with yourself, even if that's a few minutes a day, where you have an opportunity to do whatever that be, whether that's listening to music, whether that's meditation, whether that's something where you aren't necessarily consumed by the outside world and you're able to turn inwards a little bit and say, hey, am I taking care of this one? Because just like when you fly in an airplane, they say always, in the event of an emergency, the oxygen tanks come from the above, put the oxygen mask on yourself before helping others. And I think that is such an important lesson from that experience to apply to your day-to-day life, that as a provider, especially as a provider, that if we're not taking care of ourselves first, how can we take care of others? And
to have that experience is extremely important because you know what you're talking about. So
correct.
Take those recommendations that we have, because it's extremely important. And for my friends, my male friends in northern New Jersey, if you don't want to meditate, because Dr. Grover, I don't know if they meditate, my Italian American friends from northern New Jersey, but it's kind of like just saying you're just going to figure it out, so you just sit down with pen and paper, business, and you just kind of quiet your mind, right? You kind of quiet your mind, and then you can think more clearly. Listen, we're almost done. We have a couple of minutes left. We're going to have you back on, because I think there's just so much to talk about with this, right?
For sure.
Yeah.
For sure.
So if you can give 2 or 3 tips for success on what we were talking about today, what would you come up with? 3 of them.
So I think the most important thing is to identify a goal. Okay. Because I think that without a goal or a destination, it's hard to figure out where you're going to drive your car, figuratively speaking, or even literally. But you need to have a goal. So that's number 1. Number 2, I would say become educated about what you are embarking upon in the functional and integrative world, in terms of, whether that's reading books, listening to podcasts, whether that's even just spending some more time at the grocery store, read labels, and become more educated. And nowadays there's many different social groups on Facebook and other online communities that people can join, just to get more information, because I think this is what I think is important also to inform people out there. There is also a lot of misinformation out there too. So just because somebody says something is necessarily healthy, or somebody says something is a health food, don't always believe it, because there is just because something is from a store like Whole Foods or an organic grocery store doesn't mean it's good for you. So
there's no truth in labeling.
Exactly. So I think that and that's why I try to inform people that you must become more educated yourself, because that will help you also decipher, okay, what is good for me and what is not good for me.
Right.
Because I can't, as a practitioner, it's very hard to spoon feed all the information to everybody and what they should be doing. I'm here to coach them, right? I'm here to be in their corner and to help them create a kind of an autonomous lifestyle where they are able to determine, and like you were saying, when you eat something, you experience a brain fog. So have some more kind of self-awareness and say, okay, and pause. After a meal, how did I feel when I ate this?
Right.
After this experience, how did I feel when I ate this? So I would say have a goal of where you want to go, identify that. I would say educate yourself as much as possible. And then I would say, keep things simple. If there are things that you enjoy doing at a certain point in your life, and ask yourself, how many moments in today's day was I truly happy? Because when we are truly happy, or when we are truly experiencing bliss or some level of bliss in our day-to-day lives, then our hormones and our endorphins are working well.
Everything's, that whole biochemistry is regulated. Sure.
And that doesn't cost anything to create that, because I think what we have to remember is everything we experience is within ourselves. Right now, I'm looking at the screen. I'm seeing you on the screen, but that is actually a reflection inside my retina that is being translated into my brain.
Correct.
And so that's happening inside of me. So if everything is happening inside of us, in terms of our experiences, yes, there is external stimuli, but if we are able to figure out how to create the right biochemistry within ourselves, by doing these lifestyle activities, then we can have a better regulation rather than having a reaction to something in terms of being stressed out, in terms of being overwhelmed, in terms of not being able to handle things that come up in life. Then we will be able to succeed better. And that also allows us to see where we are not doing well and recognize that. I'm not saying to completely just be numb to it.
That's self-awareness. That self-awareness is very important.
And so if you are feeling like something's bothering you or you're down about something, then I would say embrace that. Embrace that experience. And even if that takes you a little bit of time to get through it,
figure out why. Figure it out.
Rather than shoving that under the rug. Deepak Chopra was talking about, I know I'm kind of going a little bit longer here.
That's okay. It's all fascinating, all very interesting.
Deepak Chopra was talking about how if we don't address pain or any kind of difficulty in that moment when we are experiencing it, whether that's physical or emotional or both, then what happens is that pain, because we haven't processed those neurotransmitters correctly, they then get imprinted in a different area of our brain, and then they come out in a way or shape that we don't even know, or we're not as aware of how that comes out. And it actually does more damage later.
Right.
And versus if we're able to deal with the pain when we have that issue right there and then, almost like, the good old saying, strike while the iron's hot. If you're upset about something, or if you're feeling vulnerable, I think it's important to embrace that vulnerability, embrace that I
agree.
That disappointment, rather than necessarily saying, suck it up, move along.
That's old school.
Yeah,
that was the old school way, right?
That was the old school way. And I think, getting back to your New Jersey Italian community you were referring to, the men, like, for example, I once in a while I go bowling with this bowling team that I substitute with here in Detroit. And, I think having a community is so important. And I think that now that we're returning to normalized life, hopefully that we stay this way post-pandemic, that embrace your community, whatever that is. Find a community. If you
community
don't
is important.
One, find a community that you can jive with, whatever that is, whether it's knitting, whether that's a dance community, of something of some sort.
It could be anything.
Yeah.
I like to say to people, join a service community where you're helping people out, whatever that looks like. I belong to the Unico. It's a Unican, and we're an Italian American organization. We give out scholarships and so forth. It's a great community, and we do very good things for everybody, just not Italian Americans. It's for everybody that we do that. So it's a good feeling, and you really help out significantly. So whatever that is, whatever jazzes you to do, I think that's part of life, and that's part of health, physical health and mental health as well. Correct?
For sure. I couldn't agree more. Right. And so, I'm blessed to now be part of the functional and integrative community, because I met some amazing people, and I don't know if you can see this in the background, and I just saw this.
Sure, of course.
Everyone. But when I did my fellowship with the University of Arizona, Andrew Weil gave us these walking sticks, and I
was noticing that, by the way, just to,
And so, it's one of those things where this reminds me always that we are in a large community of people that are like-minded, that want to help out each other. And I think sometimes that when we're in, especially the modern or traditional medical model of the hospital and clinics, and we're in this rat race, we're in such a competitive field where we're always trying to compete with one another as practitioners, rather than coming together and really being a community and thinking, okay, how can we help one another out? And, being now in this community, I have just been so blessed and amazed at how I have this international group of providers now through the Institute of Functional Medicine, through the University of Arizona Andrew Weil Center for Integrative Medicine.
And there's so many more that are out there. And we're going to discuss that later.
Yeah.
Because I can tell you the functional community, our saying is a rising tide raises all ships.
Exactly.
100%.
I'm just going to put that back there. But
there you go. So Dr. Grover, tell me, how can people contact you? Where can they, where can they contact you? Where can they find you in the world?
So if you go online to groverhealth.com, which is our website for integrative and functional medicine, you can send us an email also at info@groverhealth.com. And you can find us at Grover Health on Instagram as well.
Awesome.
And so those are 3 places where you can find us. And we would look forward to any questions or patient inquiries. And, thank you again, Dr. Cardoglio, for having me on. I really appreciate it.
It's been my pleasure. We're going to have you back on because we're going to, there's so much to talk about. And I think you and I could talk about this for days on end. So it's always interesting. So
for sure.
Dr. Grover, thank you very much for coming on. Reach out to Dr. Grover if you have any questions. Recommend him 100%. Want to thank everybody for listening in today. Live your best life.
Thank you.
Until the next time, listen to this. Send it to your family and friends. Send it to your coworkers. Send it to your neighbors because this is just great information. Dr. Grover, thank you again.
Thank you. It's truly my honor to be here.
Thank you very much. Take care, everybody.